What if the cast that had all of America laughing every single week were actually hiding stories far darker than viewers ever imagined? Martin wasn't just a hit sitcom. It was a full-blown pop culture phenomenon that turned its cast into stars almost overnight. But once the cameras stopped rolling, that shine began to crack. Martin Lawrence rose to the top, only to spiral into a wave of chaos so intense it nearly destroyed everything he had built. Tisha Campbell became one half of one of television's most unforgettable on-screen love stories, only for that image to collapse in a way people were still talking about decades later. So after 34 years, who survived the spotlight, who was crushed by it, and who changed in ways no one ever saw coming? Let's take a look back at the cast of Martin, then and now. Number 1. Martin Lawrence. The star who nearly self-destructed. There was a time when Martin Lawrence wasn't just the star of Martin. He was almost the embodiment of the kind of energy American sitcoms in the 90s craved most. Loud, magnetic, instinctive, not polished in that overly manufactured way, but so alive you couldn't look away. When Martin premiered in 1992, it quickly turned him into a phenomenon, the kind of presence who could carry an entire show with his rapid-fire delivery, his swagger, and that constant sense that absolutely anything could come out of his mouth in the next few seconds. Lawrence himself later looked back on that era as a blessing, while the press at the time saw him as a breakout talent who was explosive, charismatic, and impossible to fully predict. But Martin's rise was so fast and so huge that the spotlight seemed to bring a heavy kind of pressure onto the man behind the persona too. And maybe that's why the hardest scandal to ignore in Martin's story is still what happened with Tisha Campbell. In 1997, Tisha filed a lawsuit against Martin Lawrence and others connected to the show, making serious allegations that included sexual harassment, sexual battery, verbal abuse, and threats. The case was later settled out of court, and Tisha returned to finish the final stretch of the series under circumstances where the two of them were barely filmed together the way they once had been. That was the moment when the brightest image attached to Martin cracked in a very visible way because audiences had loved Martin and Gina as one of the most memorable on-screen couples in American television. But off-camera, behind all that chemistry, the atmosphere had apparently become far too tense to keep hidden. Martin later denied the allegations and said the claims were untrue. Years later, Tisha said there had been some healing between them, and that, to some extent, they had found a way to move past what happened. That's why, looking back, this is no longer the kind of scandal that feels simple or easy to read in black and white. Some people see it as a very clear example of power imbalance and real damage on a set. Others see it as the collapse of a working relationship pushed past its limit by fame, pressure, and ego. Either way, it remains the biggest crack ever to cut across Martin's public image. But that lawsuit was not the only crisis hanging over Martin Lawrence during that period. By the late 90s, his life seemed to move from one controversy to the next. There was the NBC ban after a Saturday Night Live monologue that many felt went way too far. Then there was the incident in Sherman Oaks when he was detained in the street in a state that no longer looked funny to anyone watching. Then came the airport gun case, and finally the collapse in 1999 when he slipped into a coma after suffering heat exhaustion. At that point, Martin was not just a man who had become famous too fast. He seemed to be living at an extreme pace, as if the same reckless energy that had once made him shine was now starting to pull him under. Now, at 61, Martin Lawrence is no longer the fiery, wild, always-on-the-edge version of himself that people remember from his peak years. He is still a valuable name, still has real pull with mainstream audiences, and still returns to major projects like Bad Boys. But the image now is much quieter, much more grounded, and carries the feeling of a man who has been through enough blows to know he can't keep burning himself the same way anymore. Looking at Martin today, people no longer see a star running on raw impulse the way he once did. They see a man who has lived through the chaos of youth, through periods that came dangerously close to spinning out of control, and who eventually had to learn how to keep living with everything he had caused and everything he had survived. Number 2. Tisha Campbell, the pain Martin couldn't hide. Maybe what makes Tisha Campbell's story linger so deeply isn't how loud it became, but how beautiful it once seemed. In the memory of so many viewers, Tisha was Gina, the woman who was smart, graceful, and just soft enough to keep Martin's world from tipping all the way into chaos. In a sitcom filled with laughter, arguments, and impulsive energy, Gina was the part that made everything feel warmer, more grounded, and more real. That is exactly why, when the story behind the scenes finally cracked open, it felt like the moment audiences realized that what they had once seen as perfect on-screen chemistry may have actually been built on top of a relationship that had been fractured for a very long time. In 1997, Tisha Campbell filed a lawsuit against Martin Lawrence and several others connected to the show, making very serious allegations that included sexual harassment, sexual battery, verbal abuse, and threats. The case was later settled out of court. Tisha still returned to finish the final stretch of the series, but under circumstances where the two of them were barely appearing together on camera the way they once had. A couple that had once made audiences believe they were one of the most unforgettable on-screen pairings in American television could no longer even stand beside each other in the same way. What keeps this story being revisited all these years later is that it was never the kind of scandal people could view from only one angle. For many, it was a very clear sign of a power imbalance on set, the story of a woman who felt forced to speak up once things had gone too far. But from another perspective, it was also the collapse of a cast and a production strained to the breaking point by fame, pressure, and oversized egos. It stopped being only about who was right and who was wrong. It became a larger question about the price people pay when they work inside an environment where power, success, and the need to maintain a beautiful public image are often placed above the actual well-being of the people living inside it. The years that followed were not easy for Tisha either. She kept working and managed to hold on to her place in the industry, but she also went through divorce, financial struggles, and a battle with sarcoidosis. So when people look at Tisha Campbell today, they do not just see an actress who was once caught up in the biggest scandal surrounding Martin. They see a woman who has lived through pain, endured more than most people realize, and still managed to hold on to her dignity. She is no longer Gina from those brightest years, but maybe that lived experience is exactly what makes Tisha feel more real, deeper, and more worth revisiting now than ever before. Number 3. Tichina Arnold, the woman who outlasted the chaos. In Martin, Tichina Arnold played Pam, a character who was sharp as a blade, sour, tough, and never willing to be nothing more than the target of somebody else's jokes. Even though Martin constantly turned her into the punchline, Pam always found a way to fire back and hold on to a sense of dignity that was entirely her own. That is exactly what made Tichina such a special part of the show. She was not the kind of character audiences fantasized about. She was the kind of woman people remembered because she felt so alive, so real, and far too strong to be pushed down. But what makes Tichina's story interesting is that over time, it became about much more than just a sitcom actress from years ago. Now, at 56, she has become one of the people who has made audiences look back at Martin in a very different way. In early 2026, when the debate around colorism in the show resurfaced, Tichina explained that the jokes aimed at Pam back then were not coming from racial malice, but from the style of sitcom banter at the time, where people constantly went at each other verbally to get laughs. But that explanation ended up sparking backlash of its own, and she later apologized. Some people see Tichina as an insider trying to explain to today's audience that the atmosphere on set and the way sitcom comedy worked back then was completely different from what it is now. A lot of things were seen as normal at the time, even though they would immediately be considered controversial today. But that is also where a bigger question starts to emerge. Did the old entertainment world let too many things go too far simply because they got laughs? And was it only years later, as society changed, that people finally started looking back at those old jokes with a different kind of discomfort? That is why what makes Tichina's story worth talking about is not some loud, sensational scandal. It is the fact that she lived through both eras, long enough to see that the things people once loved are no longer viewed in quite the same way. What is admirable is that Tichina was never swallowed by that chaos. She kept going, kept working, and held on to her place through different eras of television. When people look at Tichina Arnold now, they no longer just see Pam, the woman who used to be turned into a joke on screen. They see a woman who has lived through controversy, been misunderstood, and at times even said things that sparked backlash. But in the end, she stayed clear-headed, and remained strong enough to face the way time has rewritten the past. She did not escape the chaos by running from it. She survived it, and stayed standing long enough for her very existence to become the answer. Number 4. Carl Anthony Payne, sung, forgotten after making millions laugh. Carl Anthony Payne II was the kind of face who could change the entire rhythm of Martin the moment he stepped on screen. As Cole, he did not have to be the smartest guy in the room, and he definitely was not the coolest, but he had this goofy, restless, everyday kind of energy that could make people laugh almost instantly. Cole was the kind of character who seemed lightweight at first, but ended up sticking in people's memories for a very long time. He was not just there to add laughs. He was part of that wild, offbeat chaos that gave Martin so much of its life. And maybe that is exactly why Carl's later journey leaves behind such a strange sense of disappointment. Carl did not have the kind of loud public collapse that turns someone into the center of a Hollywood scandal. His story is sadder in a different way. Years later, Carl himself admitted that there had been a period of tension between him and Martin Lawrence on set. The two of them were not nearly as smooth behind the scenes as audiences may have imagined. And Martin at the time was also dealing with a lot of personal issues of his own. On screen, Cole always seemed like Martin's loyal sidekick, right there with him through every ridiculous situation. But off camera, there were clearly tensions and fractures the audience never got to see. Carl's personal life was not entirely calm either. His long marriage once cracked badly enough to head toward divorce, even though the two were later said to have reconciled. It did not destroy his name, but it was enough to remind people that even the faces who seem the quietest and least dramatic are not living untouched lives. Looking at Carl Anthony Payne II today, what lingers is not some huge tragedy, but the feeling of a man who once made millions of viewers laugh and then slowly drifted away from Hollywood. Number 5. Thomas Michael Ford, the heartbreaking fall of Tommy. What is sadder than a face that once made people smile every time he appeared, only to leave before anyone was even ready to imagine saying goodbye? In Martin, Thomas Michael Ford was Tommy, the man who always seemed a little more grounded than the rest of the group. In a world filled with arguments, teasing, and energy that always felt like it was about to explode, Tommy was the one who made everything feel a little less chaotic. He was still funny, still charming, but never in a loud way. There was something uniquely steady about Thomas, the kind of presence that gave a scene more weight just by being there. Maybe that is why Tommy was never the most shocking character, but he was one of the ones who left behind the deepest sense of familiarity. After Martin, Thomas kept working, kept showing up on television, and maintained a much quieter public image than many of his co-stars. But in 2016, everything suddenly took a heartbreaking turn when he suffered a ruptured abdominal aneurysm and was hospitalized. At first, the people around him still hoped he would pull through. But Thomas Michael Ford passed away at just 52 years old. His death came too fast, too early, and too coldly, especially for someone audiences had always associated with steadiness and strength. Maybe what makes Thomas's story so painful is that he did not go out in a blaze of scandal or after a life spent burning himself down. He simply kept working, kept living quietly, and was gone before viewers ever had the chance to imagine what it would look like for him to grow old. Looking back at Thomas today, the saddest part is not some dramatic downfall. It is the emptiness he left behind. Tommy was the one who made the world of Martin feel less unstable. And once he was gone, that memory felt emptier too. Number 6. Tracy Morgan, crashed, broken, but never completely gone. Tracy Morgan was the kind of presence who could show up for just a moment on Martin and still leave a lasting impression. As Hustle Man, he brought this strange, messy, totally unpredictable energy, the kind of character who could walk into a scene and instantly change the whole mood. It was not the biggest role of his career, but it was one of the earliest signs that he had something rare, the ability to make people laugh just by being on screen. Later on, Tracy went much farther than most people probably imagined. From an oddball supporting face, he grew into a major comedy star through Saturday Night Live and then 30 Rock. But his life did not rise in one smooth, glamorous line. In 2014, a horrific car crash nearly split his life in two. The vehicle Tracy was riding in was hit by a truck, killing his friend James McNair, while Tracy suffered a severe brain injury, broken bones, and fell into a coma. What makes Tracy's story stay with people is not just the crash itself, but everything that came after. He did not only have to recover physically, he also had to keep living with the grief of losing his friend and with the terrifying reality that he had come dangerously close to never making it back at all. Looking at Tracy Morgan today, people do not just see a comedian who survived a tragedy. They see a man's life hit hard, but never fully taken away. And somehow, he still carries that same wild spark he had back in the days when he was Hustle Man. Number 7. Garrett Morris, a survivor. Hollywood never fully defeated. Garrett Morris came from a generation of performers who had to fight for every inch of space they were given on screen. By the time he appeared on Martin as Stan Winters, he already had a very long road behind him. He was not just another supporting face in the cast. He was a man who had survived multiple eras of television that were never truly easy for someone like him, and that gave his presence a very different kind of weight. What makes Garrett's story worth revisiting is not some explosive scandal, but the fact that he went through so much and still kept going. He built his name long before Martin, most notably through Saturday Night Live, but that path was never as smooth as people might imagine when looking back at a legend. There were periods when his career slowed down, moments when the spotlight shifted to someone else, and the quieter reality of growing older in an industry that is always chasing whatever feels newer. Now Garrett Morris is 89 years old. He recently told people that he is still working even though age and arthritis have clearly taken a toll, and he still believes roles for older people should actually go to older actors. He has also remained involved in events tied to SNL 50 and has continued showing up in recent television projects like The Neighborhood and How I Met Your Father. Garrett is no longer the kind of star standing at the center of the spotlight, but he is still here, still has a voice, and still carries the image of a man growing older without letting himself be pushed completely out of the game. Looking at Garrett Morris today, people do not just see a veteran actor who once made audiences laugh. They see a survivor, someone Hollywood could overlook, sideline, and move on from without looking back, but never fully erase. Number 8. John Grease. The comeback. Nobody saw coming. John Grease was never the kind of face most people immediately placed at the center of Martin, and maybe that is exactly why his later comeback feels so satisfying. On the show, he was one of those familiar supporting presences who helped build out the world around the main cast, but he was never the name audiences talked about first. For a long time, that was the story of John Grease in Hollywood too. He kept working, kept showing up, and stayed active, but mostly as the kind of actor people recognized without always remembering his name. That is what makes his later return so interesting. John did not come back through scandal, reinvention, or some dramatic personal collapse. He came back because time suddenly caught up with him in a different way. After years of being a familiar face on the edges of popular culture, he found a whole new wave of attention through The White Lotus, where a younger generation of viewers discovered him almost as if he were brand new. And that is the strange beauty of John Grease's story. Some actors fade quietly and stay there. John did fade for a while, but he also proved that sometimes Hollywood gives a second act to the people nobody expected to see rise again. If Martin was ever part of your memory too, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us as we keep looking back at the stars time changed in ways no one saw coming.